I have a petition here which I hope to get as many signatures as possible to present to the governing bodies of the schools. One thing we are pushing for is a proper consultation process, and that a binding ballot of parents and staff is held to inform this important decision. This is something that they don't have to do. What do the panel think about schools moving from local authority control to becoming academies, and will the panel endorse our campaign and sign the petition?
Oh, right, okay, Julie. Well, too, you'll have to stop me here because I can bore you for many a day with this. Because about 3 years ago, for a reason I'm not entirely sure why, I seemed to move down to Hove, and about a year ago, the school where my stepdaughters go to, suddenly it was announced that it was going to become an academy. And the bit of what you said to Julia that really strikes with me is a proper consultation process. Because it turns out that the rules of how to change a school from one that's connected to the local authority into an academy, a consultation process has to take place. But, this is the words, a consultation is deemed to have taken place if the parents are told that it is going on. That's a consultation process that Vladimir Putin would be happy with. So, out come the brochures, out come all these the marvellous little glossy brochures, the sort you get from a tourist office. I'd love to know if you recognise any of this. These are the marvellous buildings that you'll have when there's an academy. This is what's going to happen. It's going to be terrific. It's going to be, you're going to have money. If we don't, I mean literally, if we don't go this way, there will be no money for the school at all. The buildings will rot. I mean, we were taken to this sort of thing where they consulted us by telling us this and shown films. You couldn't spoof it better. There was a picture of a rotting building. That's what it's going to be without an academy. And then this sort of drawing, this space-agey sort of thing, like something from a 1970s science fiction. This is, your children will go to school in spaceships and live on the planet. And so on. So, a meeting was called at which people, it's not a particularly radical constituency, a very marginal constituency politically. And people that, you sort of think, are you going to go with it? Someone came down and spoke very well about the need for direct action. I found myself thinking, oh, I can't see the neighbours going for that. And the neighbours did go for that. They all voted for it and threw their hats in the air and so on. But it seemed utterly impossible. I don't know, you may feel this. It seems impossible. That's it, it's done. There's no point in complaining and arguing. So we did the things you do. There was petitions, and there was meetings, and there was rallies, and there was sort of benefits and a march, and there was that sort of thing. And in particular, and this was where something was in our favour, two things that were very important. The first was that the Green Party, who have the biggest party in the council, ordered the parents to have a ballot, ordered there to be an official parents' ballot, which the school didn't like. Such was their commitment to democracy. And the teachers, in a school where there was no history of any trade unions at all, some of them joined a union, and within a month, the two things went together. The campaign of the teachers, alongside the campaign of the parents, went together, each giving each other confidence. The teachers got enough people into the union to call a strike. Not everybody was in the union at that time. The headmaster was so arrogant that then even the people who weren't in the union said they'd support the strike, and the school was completely shut for a day. And on top of that, the ballot, we won 72 to 28%. At which point, the headmaster and the local Conservative MP said that this makes absolutely no difference. It's got nothing to do with what you vote for, right? And then just trash the whole thing like that. So the campaign had to go on. I won't bore you with all the other things, except to say that bit by bit, we won the press round. Now this weren't easy. It seems like I'm just sort of reeling these things off as if we went down like the way it would be in a Hollywood movie. We went down and the press said, but we can't support this. This is outrageous. We won them round and gave them a cup of tea. It was more difficult than that. But bit by bit, the press, the local television were down every day. They're so arrogant. They're not used to a proper fight. The heads, and Michael Gove was back in this, incidentally. The day that the ballot result came out was the same day that Michael Gove was kicked out of the cabinet. At that point, one by one, like in 12 Angry Men, except it was men and women, the Board of Governors, one by one, won people round, not really because they were politically won to the idea of being anti-academy, but they could see that the whole city was against them. It was on the local telly every night, it was on the front page of the local paper every day, there was marches and rallies and kids singing and dancing with placards every day, and in the end the Board of Governors just chucked the towel in and said, all right, you're not going to have the academy, and they gave up. And I'll just finish with this. This was the most, if it was a Hollywood film, you would say this is an outrageous ending, it couldn't happen. We had elections for 3 more vacant posts on the Board of Governors. We stood 3 people anti-academy, we won by a landslide, all 3 got on, which made it even more annoying for the head. This head, incidentally, was going to be head of, what was it, the phrase you used, a multi-academy network, some great poncy bloody thing. It was going to be, most pertinently, he was going to be able to award himself a 250 grand a year salary, whatever the phrase was. All of that was in ruins for him. He's now got to face a Board of Governors that hate him. And at the next meeting, he broke down in the meeting and started crying. At which point, it was his bad luck that one of the people we'd stood, who won the post of the Board of Governors, happened to be a mental health nurse who then was given the job of going through all the process of getting into deep breaths and calm blue ocean or whatever you say, breathe into a bag, Mr. Trimmer, it's fine, you'll be fine. At which point he just gave up the whole thing, and this week he left the school altogether. It's one of the most brilliant things I've taken part in, and the school is not an academy, and if you go to the school now, you see the teachers are literally an inch taller than they were a year ago. They were in fear. You spoke to them, they dared, even at the meetings, they were like you sort of films you see of people in Soviet Union in 1960 or something, scared to speak. And now they speak every time that the head tries to bring in, well, he's gone now, but every time he tried to bring in some new regulation where they had to work longer hours or something, they just said, well, we're not doing it. And they felt different people. Everyone who's taken part in that campaign feels like a different person. They feel like if we all stand up, at least we've got a chance. And people, the kids, the teachers, everyone who took part feels brilliant about it. So, I don't know, I hope that gives some answer to your question. In particular, I would say this. When they say there's nothing you can do, it's clearly you don't believe this because you're standing up saying all these things you're doing, but when they say, no, that's it, it's decided, the consultation's gone through, you've all disagreed with it, and so we've taken that as agreeing with it. When they say that, do not believe them because you can win.
Local authority. And all private schools. Which is why I'll never be elected. The educational system we have in this country is incredibly efficient at transmitting and perpetuating inequality. It does some other wonderful things, but it does that really, really well. One thing we could do is randomise admissions in areas where it is difficult to get children into good schools unless you pay an awful lot for extremely expensive houses. In Brighton, they did have randomisation of admissions for secondary school, and a lot of middle-class parents said that wasn't fair. Which suggests their children needed a decent mathematics education. They're not going to end up with as good a grasp of statistics as Ian Duncan Smith. Actually, Michael Gove's not very good either. He wants all our schools to be above average. But as well as moving all schools into local authority control, I think we should be reforming early childhood education to emphasise the role of play. I think we should be...
national curriculum to think about a more well-rounded and balanced education, and getting rid of standardised tests that just pit one school against another school and trap our children in rote learning and restrict them from a full exploration of their own capabilities. And I'd be in favour of randomised admissions to universities as well. I suggested this to the Dean of an Oxford College at a dinner one night. I said, why not just, have a pool of people who've all got, the same qualifications, plenty of people across the whole educational spectrum with good A-level results, and then randomly select some to come to your college. And it took him a while to grasp what I meant. It was such an alien idea. And then he simply said, no, that wouldn't work at all. Which is a bit like Ian Duncan Smith saying, I don't accept those things there. But bringing back some democracy into our educational system would be incredibly transformative. We would all be thinking about how we work to make every school the best it could be for all of our children. We wouldn't need pupil premiums. We would just have good schools in every neighbourhood for all children.
I think all of us on the panel and everyone in the room agrees that academies should go, and I'm sure everyone will be making sure they sign the petition as they leave tonight. And I think that point about how the whole academy process is part of destroying education is so important. It's part of the privatisation drive that's taking part in education, the same as it is in the NHS and every aspect of our life. And really what we need to say is that it's time that things were turned around. The point that Kate was making about sort of what education should be is so very important. I came into teaching quite late in my life. It was at the time that you could still talk about child-centred education and the idea that children in a primary school where I taught should be able to enjoy coming. We've actually got a situation now where the actual reading standards that can be achieved in primary schools have gone up on what they were when I started teaching. We've also reached the standard that very few children now, compared to then, actually enjoy reading. What's the point in actually teaching people basic skills that they don't enjoy and aren't prepared to use? For me, education isn't about learning facts, which is what seems to be drilled in all the time now. Education is about learning about how you find out facts and how you use them. And one of the things that struck me when I first moved to Barnes in the 1970s, an area that was dominated by collieries, was the number of people who left school at a very early age, who got into the union and had become skilled at being able to negotiate and trip managers up every time with their ability to find out the information that was necessary to put their case and to put it over, and then to go to mass meetings of their workmates and convince them that if necessary they come out on strike. This is something that sort of working class education should be about showing how we use our skills to a purpose and try and make things better for society. But one other thing we have to say about academies, well, first of all, I hope that what Mark said is going to be taken out of the video that's being made and shown to every school that's faced with being an academy, because I thought that's a customary story. And we have to emphasise it isn't the only example of academies being defeated. Now, I don't know if you've been in touch with it, but there is an Anti-Academies Alliance that my unit, the NUT, has put quite a lot of effort into developing. And that puts out information constantly about campaigns, many of which have failed, but a significant number of which have been successful. So we need to say that we have to put that information out and give confidence to people to fight back. I don't know whether Owen or anyone else knows what the Labour Party policy on this is. I saw Tristan Hunt the other day seem to be saying that he's in favour of grammar schools staying, which I think is really quite appalling. And we have to remember, it was under the Blair government that the whole academy programme was started. Lord Adonis brought it in on the basis that this was going to take failing schools and make them better. We've now got lots of academies in this country that are failing. Yeah, what's the answer to failing academies, which are meant to be the answer to failing schools? You've got a complete and utter nonsense. And the only reason for bringing in academies is that thing that I said at the outset. It's about bringing privatisation into education. Just lastly on free schools. In Barnsley, our college, which seems to think it's one of the big players in the town, decided, or the principal of the college decided that he wanted the college to set up a free school in Barnsley. And so he had a meeting last year where he invited parents to come along and discuss setting up a free school that the college would have built. Because the response was looking as though it was very poor, he actually sent an email around all the staff saying, whether you've got children or not, will you come along to the meeting and support me? And very few people did turn up. He still went ahead with his plans, and we found out last week the number of people that applied to start at the free school in September. And there's a bit of an argument about the numbers. There's two different figures I've heard. The figure that the college is putting out is that 8 applied. But I'm told the real figure is actually 1. I suppose, actually trying to put a positive gloss on this, it means that if they carry on investing the £330,000 from the college funds that they were intending doing, at least it will be a school with better class size ratio than the public schools have. But I think that we really need to see a stand up and fighting back. And it does come down to the example that Mark talked about, that if confidence can be given, if parents and teachers can work together, then I think that any campaign could be successful.
I'm the proud product of comprehensive education, and I'm sick to death of comprehensive education being scapegoated for all the ills of society. What is one of the best education systems on earth? It's Finland. Now, there's 2 reasons for that. One, it's the education system itself. They don't have private schools, they don't have selection, they don't have fragmentation. They have good, properly accountable local schools, properly resourced, with teachers who are respected and properly looked after. And the second thing is, they have a far more equal society than we have here in Britain. Now, we have to, of course, get rid of all this fragmentation, and that includes academies. It also includes segregating children by the bank balances of their parents, and segregating children as well by the religious convictions of their parents. If we take private schools, we subsidise private education in this country because they have charitable status. That is a subsidising of class privilege. We've got to scrap all charitable status for private schools. Simple as that. And we get that in our schools. As well as having properly locally accountable schools, not these vanity projects like free schools for the sharp elbowed, where you get these free schools set up in areas where there's no shortage of school places, whilst areas where you desperately need schools aren't being properly looked after. It's ridiculous. But not just that, we have to deal with the inequalities as well. Do you know, I find this fascinating. One of the only times I set foot in a private school was to go to the City of London school. And I went there with Fiona Miller, who's a campaigner for comprehensive education. We were arguing against Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, I don't know if anyone knows Jacob Rees-Mogg, but he's basically a walking political broadcast for the Labour Party, frankly. But I think as well, I quite like Jacob at every house. But the point actually made to a lot of those kids was your parents are wasting your money, because we were there to argue for the abolition of private education at the City of London school, quite something. And the point I was making is children from privileged backgrounds actually do better at comprehensives than they do at private schools. So it's quite an interesting fact, and that's because educational inequality is a reflection of social and economic inequalities in our society. There was a study about middle-class kids in inner-city schools, and 15% of them ended up going to Oxford. And the reality is, at the age of 5, and there's a study in Scotland that showed this, a child from a rich background has a vocabulary 18 months ahead of a 5-year-old from the poorest background. That inequality starts from birth. The birth weight of a child from a poor family is lower than that of the birth rate from a richer family. It's the housing crisis, the fact that in London, this booming, prosperous capital city, 1 in 4 kids grow up in an overcrowded home, with huge consequences for their health, their education, and their well-being. They do far worse at school because of the impact on their lives. The fact that people turn up to school with poor diets or hungry, for that matter. And that's why we have to deal with those underlying inequalities. We've got to invest in early years to actually redress the gap which starts literally at birth. We've got to have universal free school meals, both breakfast and at lunch. We can afford to do that. Not where you means test it and stigmatise people. We all went to schools where that happened. Not that sort of stigma. But we also deal with the housing crisis. We tackle those massive inequalities that mean that children from better off backgrounds do better than children from poorer backgrounds. It's not structure. The answer isn't fragmentation or setting up vanity projects for the sharp-elbowed privileged people. It's not about dividing people by faith and breaking up communities. It's about learning from countries like Finland, where they have a good, decent local school for everybody, and that is what we should be fighting for.